Today I want to talk about common sense. And we all have common sense. Some of us have more than the other. I remember years ago when my husband at the time, which I didn't realize he was on the spectrum, and my dad said about my husband, he says he doesn't have sense enough to come in out the rain. And I was very insulted by that. And years later, I came to understand that he was on the spectrum. And so therefore, his thinking capacities as far as common sense were a little different than most of us. But all of us have some degree of common sense. We learn how to put our clothes on, we learn how to dress, and common sense means we adapt to what works best or works better. So the thing about lawyers in the law practice is a lot of times what was perceived as to be common sense, which was work really hard, going back to law school, work very hard, burn the midnight oil, push yourself, that was the sense or the rules or the environment that most lawyers came up in. But as they got older, a lot of times they saw that did not make common sense. Now, I'm not saying that to insult anybody who's doing the work around the clock all the time. But the truth is that more common sense comes when you have a balanced body, a balanced mind, and balanced health. You know, when we look at how we were raised a particular way, a lot of times it didn't make common sense. Maybe you grew up around a lot of people that drank all the time and drinking was just an everyday thing. But then when you got older, it didn't make common sense to be drinking that much or be drinking that often because there was a toll to pay. And that's where you look at who's going to be the most successful or who's going to have a better life because they heed things that maybe seem like common sense at the time or common sense we were younger, but as we get older and common experience tells us those don't make sense. I'm thinking about a client that I'll call Richard, and he was sitting across from me and he was like 6 figures in debt. He was working 72 hours a day, and no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't get ahead. He kept getting more and more in debt. It doesn't make sense what's going on. And this is where a lot of lawyers find themselves stuck because they don't seek like a coach or someone who could have an objective point of view. Why aren't things working? I'm doing things the way I've always done it. And then why isn't it working now? Why am I getting more in debt? Why am I not getting clients? So with Richard couldn't make sense of it. And usually we don't stop to get help right away. Usually we wait until we're in a lot of pain or a lot of debt, unfortunately. And that's just the human condition. Richard told me, he said face to face, he says, I feel like I'm on a treadmill and it only keeps speeding up and I can't catch up. And what the painful part is, and the painful part from all of us when we get to these things where we thought we had common sense, is that we're doing everything right. We're doing all the things we learned that were right. You know, in Richard's case, he was working 70 some odd hours. He was taking on bad clients that really weren't helping his practice. He was taking on people that weren't collecting. He was working in an environment where his staff wasn't helping him. The way he was practicing law was outdated, and he kept trying to do all these things. So what did he do? Here's some things that Richard tried. Okay, he cut his personal expenses. Obviously, if the firm isn't making enough money, it makes sense to cut my personal expenses and tell my wife and my kids, okay, we're really under the gun here. We really need to cut everything down. And then we need to, okay, no vacations. And then I'm going to be working nights and weekends. If I keep working and working, I'll catch up. And he's taken in bad cases, and he knew things that would help him. You know, for the years, he knew which would be a hard case. This is going to be a difficult client. And then he would hire people that would help him, generally hiring people that were below par because I can't afford to pay a good person to work. And then they would leave, and then he would let them go. It did not fix it. So then he says, maybe if I spend money I don't have on marketing. So he went there, and there's these gurus out there who haven't practiced law, maybe not practiced law in your area, and they're telling you how you could market. And so he spent thousands of dollars trying to help him market and get more clients. And when that didn't work, he started reading productivity books, and he threatened to say, maybe I'll take CLEs, doing all these things. Can you imagine how frustrated Richard was that this common sense wasn't working? He never caught up, and things look worse. So when Richard hired me, the first thing we did was we looked at, okay, what are some things that you're doing that are not worthwhile. A lot of times you just do things because this is how you always did it, but is it profitable? And so we knew that Richard had a great work ethic. He wasn't laid back. He was really trying, but he was spreading himself too thin across work that didn't pay him back. And the other part that we got to when we looked at a time audit for Richard was that he thought being busy meant that he was going to stay relevant. He felt like exhaustion was the price of success. Common sense tells us if I'm exhausted and I'm doing a task, A, either it's going to take me 2 or 3 times longer, and B, it might be more mistakes than I want and have to be redone. So working exhausted is not going to work. And so once we started, we tightened up Richard's calendar. We focused on what was profitable. We got a very solid marketing plan in place. Guess what? His business started to stabilize. We got him out of debt very quickly. One of the things he was on his goals for when he came to talk to me was he wanted to create a college fund. He was able to do that. And with his being rested, with him being joyful, with him being enthusiastic, because his enthusiasm replaced his exhaustion, he was making the money. And instead of taking those thousands of dollars he took for courses, he and his wife went to Paris. Not out of panic, not out of guilt, not out of fear. This is going to nourish me so that I'm going to even make more money. So he stopped filling his calendar with work that didn't pay him. And it took him not long for him to turn his law practice around. So I want to ask you, if 5 or more years happen without you changing anything, where are you going to be? Would you think, if nothing changed, would you consider your law practice its survival or success? That's the thing I want you to think about, because Richard said, if I had not changed anything, I'd been doing what I'd been doing for years, and as the economy tanked and everything that was going on, he kept going down, down. He said, if I hadn't stopped it, I probably wouldn't be in business today. So therefore, take an audit for yourself. Find out how you can get help, because help is available, and don't follow Richard's pattern of doing all the stuff of courses and gurus and taking on clients and working yourself to the bone, because that never works. Click subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.